Welcome to the Storytime Adventures for Adults video series. Today we will be reading Part 1, 1730, pages 73 to 77 from Songs from the Depths by Meg Swanson. Constance's hands stopped working, and she looked at her friend closely. "Are you sure? Things have been pretty quiet around here. Maybe this is just a rumor." Sarah shook her head so vehemently her hat wobbled. "Miss Constance, all of this is true. My husband heard it from the doctor who came to help you along with the lambing. You know his home is away outside of town. Dr. Smith said he heard from the horse's mouth, so to speak." Sarah smiled at her pun. "Meaning what exactly?" "Meaning he had to calm the woman who found the minstrel's body. She was in a terrible state. She came running down the street, tripping over her own feet, and basically fell at the good doctor's door." Constance sharply inhaled and sat back in her chair. "No!" Sarah held a hand up. "Hand to God, Miss Constance. Anyway, the veterinarian said that after a day or two's rest, she should be right as rain, and able to play for us right in the town square." "Well, I'm glad that she'll be okay." Constance had her head back in her weaving. Sarah sat with her for another few minutes before standing and straightening her skirt. She said, "Well, I have more shopping to do, and you know William. He just hates when I dally too long here." Constance smiled. That man didn't hate a thing that Sarah did, but she understood that there was actual shopping that needed to be finished. "Of course, you just stop by again soon, and please tell your husband that I'll be in need of another bag of wool soon. I'm hoping to get some more of that gray." Relief brightened Sarah's smile. "I will do that, thank you." By the time the next market day rolled around, the whole town was bustling with news of this mysterious musician who had literally fallen into town. Constance sat in her rocking chair, carding wool that Sarah's husband had brought by earlier that week. It had been an interesting week, hearing people talk about the newcomer, mainly because everyone Constance spoke with had been so vague. Evidently the newcomer was blonde and tall for a woman, but the main focus of everyone with whom Constance had spoken was that this woman's voice was an angel's. Other than that, though, no one could tell Constance anything. They couldn't even tell Constance the musician's name, which she thought was odd. But the people in town brushed her off, telling her that she was worried for no reason. She was told at every turn what a great guest this traveling musician was, and how she only stayed with each family 1 or 2 nights because she didn't want to impose. And, one woman told Constance when she was picking up the new winter cloak Constance had made for her, "She paid for her stay with us with a song that she wrote just for us. It was so beautiful and relaxing. I've never slept as well as I did that night." That seemed absurd to Constance. Goods were dear in this town, and most people were usually willing to barter for something they needed. Who needed a song? Constance was so focused on her work that she didn't realize she had a visitor until a shadow fell across her loom. She smiled when she looked up at Sarah. "Good morning, Miss Howell. How long have you been standing there?" Sarah continued to only stand over Constance. Constance stood and looked at Sarah more carefully. Her coat was misbuttoned, and her hair, which was usually carefully pinned into place, fell in mousy strands around her shoulders. Her shawl hung off one arm and dragged behind her on the dusty ground. The shawl pin was missing. "Sarah, what happened? Is it your husband? Has there been an accident?" Sarah did not acknowledge that Constance had spoken, so Constance shook Sarah and started to shout her name. Finally, Sarah seemed to come out of her daze. She looked around confusedly. "Miss Constance, what am I doing here? What happened?" "What do you mean?" "Well, last night it was our turn to host the traveling player at our home, and I must have fallen asleep. Now I'm here." Constance stood back, staring agog at Sarah. "Do you remember anything about last night?" Sarah shook her head. "I need to sit down. I feel lightheaded." "Of course, please sit here." Sarah lowered herself into the rocking chair and leaned back. Constance carefully sat back down at her loom, but she didn't resume working. She let Sarah rock slowly for a few minutes before asking, "So you let that woman stay at your house?" Sarah opened her eyes and raised her head slightly. "Well, of course. It was the neighborly thing to do. After she found that body on the side of the road, she needs all the help she can get." Constance narrowed her eyes. "She's been here over a week now, though. Why hasn't she started her town performances?" Sarah shrugged. "She's getting there. Just give her time. But don't worry. You'll hear her soon, and you'll love her voice as much as I do." "What's she like?" "Well, she's blonde, very tall, extremely respectful, and has a voice like an angel." Constance rolled her eyes. "That's what everyone says. You're always able to get people to tell you everything. She didn't give you a name or anything?" "A name?" "Her name. She didn't tell you her name?" Constance was getting impatient. Sarah was never this dull. There was something very wrong. Sarah yanked her fingers through her tangled hair. "Oh, Miss Constance, I don't know. We talked late into the night, and then she insisted on singing for us. Then I was here. Who can remember all the details of our conversations?" Sarah stood suddenly and said, "I'm sorry. I need to go home. Please, everything is fine." Constance took the shawl from Sarah, shook it out, and knotted it securely around her friend's shoulder. "Sarah, where's your pin?" Sarah looked at Constance quizzically. "What pin?" "Your golden pearl shawl pin. You always wear it." Sarah yanked her arm away with more anger than was warranted. "Miss Constance, I believe you have me confused with one of your many patrons. I have never had anything that audacious, gold or otherwise. You know we don't have that kind of money, and I feel very upset you would make light of it." This was Part 1, 1730, pages 73 to 77 from Songs from the Desk by Meg Swanson. We will continue with Part 1 next week. If you can't wait until then to hear how the story goes, feel free to purchase the book at www.megswanson.me. If you would like to contribute to these series, please feel free to become a patron on Patreon. Details for joining are on my website, www.reneeannhughes.com, and also please subscribe to this YouTube channel so you won't miss any new videos. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.